You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So, as we have been saying, first of all, we apologize for not being with you guys on Friday. I didn't even make any announcement. We were going to do it, and then we didn't do it. That's about all I can tell you. I developed a really bad migraine, like literally a half hour before the show. And I thought about pushing through, but then I'm like, you know what? I'd rather have no show than a bad show. And, I mean, I might have been able to do it, but...
Plus, we had a pretty severe winter storm, too. So,
yeah,
we
did. And it was
also afraid of loss of quality in the show, too.
Yes, that was another good point, actually. That storm hit everybody, so that could have caused a lot of havoc for us. So, the show that we were going to do Friday, we're going to do this coming Friday. We promise. So you're not going to want to miss that one. It's actually going to be a pretty cool one. And then, of course, we're continuing this series tonight about what is Star Wars. Now we're entering into the original trilogy. So I think pretty much, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of the biggest things was not everybody has seen, or not everybody grew up, I should say it like that. Not everybody grew up with Star Wars. Some people came into it even with the sequel trilogy, or maybe some of the Disney Plus shows. You know, maybe they saw The Mandalorian or Obi-Wan or Book of Boba Fett or something like that and said, you know what? Let me go back and watch A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. And, you know, there's always new people coming to this franchise. So what we thought we would do, whether you're brand new to the franchise and maybe you've only seen A New Hope a couple of times because you're really new to it, or maybe you're like us and have grown up with this, and we're just going to be taking a second look at it, and we're going to be talking about and dissecting and analyzing really what is Star Wars, starting with A New Hope, because after all, that's the one that launched this whole thing. I told the story a couple of weeks ago about when it was first released, it wasn't even called A New Hope. It wasn't called Episode 4. It was just Star Wars. You know, they didn't add that until 1980 on that theatrical re-release. So, yeah, I thought that this was a really good idea. And I know we're going to continue on with the original trilogy. That's the plan, right?
Yep.
And then, what are we doing after that?
We're going to bounce to the prequels.
Okay.
Then, of course, end up at the sequels.
Well,
we already,
Well, I mean,
the sequels not so much, because we've kind of done the sequels already to a degree.
Yeah, but maybe not through the lens.
Skywalker.
But not through the lens of this, really. I mean, I guess you could, yeah. I mean,
true.
We're always talking about it. But, and here's the thing, in case you guys are wondering, look, we know that next week the Bad Batch Season 2 comes out, and March 1st is when The Mandalorian Season 3 comes out. So we'll probably just go back and forth. We'll just use our Friday show to review those, because you know we don't want to shortchange anybody on the reviews. So we're gonna stay somewhat philosophical for our Monday show, and then we'll we'll ease back into reviews and news and all that for our Friday show. So, A New Hope. Now, of course, we have a ton of visual aids here to guide the conversation and to talk about what it is that pretty much made this movie what it is, and really, like I said, set the tone for the entire franchise. So was there anything that you wanted to say by way of introduction before we really get into this stuff?
First of all, happy holidays to everyone. I know for a lot of people, this is the observance of Christmas for some people because of, with it falling on a Sunday. So happy holidays, everyone. Yeah, man. I mean, this is where we're at. The original trilogy. This is what kicked us all off with Star Wars. Those of us who grew up probably post 99 or pre 99, I should say.
Yeah.
So yeah, the original trilogy is where it's at. This is the first of the Holy Grail, right? You know, everybody kind of holds the original trilogy in such high esteem, and for good reason. But we're going to actually explain to you all like what made the original trilogy so good, movie by movie. So the first one being Episode 4, A New Hope. This is one that George Lucas pretty much decided he was going to start the whole story on. I mean, he had one, two, and three, but he started with four because at the time technology was so that he could actually complete, you know, episode four the way that he envisioned it, and then two, it had a definite in and out. So in case, you know, Star Wars wasn't successful, all right, you kind of got a nice beginning and a decent conclusion to the end of it all. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's, again, I think that that's one of the things that is a good way to start this thing off, right? Is the fact that this was the one episode in the entire 9-episode saga where it had a definitive beginning and ending that if he could only do one, this would be the one to do. And I think that that's the reason probably why he didn't start it out right from the beginning as episode 4. Because like you said, he knew it was going to be in episode 4. But, and I mean, and it's a little strange too, because let me just give a little bit of history on how some of this thing worked. So, when George Lucas first conceived of this, it was called something like Journal of the Whills, The Adventures of Luke Starkiller and the Star Wars, or something like that. It had some long, convoluted, crazy title to it. And then he shortened down the title. But in doing so, at first, he actually had a single, like, 6-hour film or something like that, where he essentially had episodes 4 through 6 is just one big film. And that's where it began. And then he sort of whittled it down to what we know as episode 4. And then, as you and I had talked about before, his wife was instrumental because she edited the film in giving us the pacing and pretty much the movie that we look at as the original Star Wars film today. So there's a lot of back and forth and everything from right from when it was written all the way through the production and especially the post-production. So it cannot be understated how important it was to get this one right, because it's not just a question of, hey, it went on to do other box office or allowed you to do other films, but it actually set the tone of what this franchise was even going to be. And it also shows that it wasn't just George Lucas. I mean, you can't give Lucas enough credit as far as spearheading the thing and all the other stuff, but you also, by the same token, have to remember that he didn't do this all by himself. You had the artwork of Ralph McQuarrie, who essentially gave us the look of all these characters that we're going to talk about tonight. And you also have, like I said, his wife doing the post-production. You had various actors like coming in and giving their opinions. Less so on A New Hope. That really came into play more with Empire Strikes Back. But still, you had a team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, definitely. It was definitely a big collaborative effort. I mean, you had the wonderful design of, you know, what later became Industrial Light and Magic, creating a lot of the different motions that we got to see in The New Hope. From the space battles and the rotoscoping that they use to create lightsabers. I mean, there's a wealth and a plethora of things that we could talk about on a technical side, and you know, that made Star Wars so pivotal. And we might even do a show on that one day. You know, just all the technical advances Star Wars has brought to the film world and television. But sticking to the plot of it, though, we actually had a very concise story. George Lucas is phenomenal at being a great storyteller. I mean, that's one of the things that we can honestly say, if he can do anything else, he's a great storyteller. From Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Red Tails, the list goes on. I mean, he's really good at telling stories. And Star Wars was actually directed by George Lucas. New Hope was directed by George Lucas, but subsequent movies such as Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi were directed by others, and we'll get into that when we cover those films. But for right now, let's get on to A New Hope.
All right, so if we're going to get on to A New Hope, obviously the first thing that we have to talk about is the opening crawl, because this is one of the things that immediately differentiates this movie from the other sci-fi movies. And again, we talked about this before, but the whole reason why George Lucas did this film was because he originally wanted to do Flash Gordon, because with all the... And we dealt with this on last Monday's episode called The Legacy. So if you guys missed that, you go back. We started a new series, What is Star Wars? First episode was The Legacy. And we talked about the fact that he actually wanted to do a Flash Gordon movie. But Dino De Laurentiis got the rights out from under him. That movie was eventually made in 1980, where Queen did the soundtrack, and you had Sam J. Jones as Flash Gordon. Again, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. Thank goodness Lucas lost the rights to it, because his whole attitude was like, you know what? Fine, I'll do my own Star Wars, or my own Flash Gordon type film. And he called it Star Wars, and basically, he wanted to keep that Saturday matinee style. And so as a result, that's why we get this opening crawl, because it's very much that Flash Gordon-y type of thing, to where they're setting up exactly what's going to happen. Now, you'll notice that the version of the crawl that I used for this was after they called it Episode 4, A New Hope. And of course, I did that on purpose, because that's predominantly what we're talking about here. Yeah.
That's how most fans know it. Yeah,
that's how most fans know it. Yeah, it would almost be pointless to try to... It's like, look, we're not going to hammer in the history of this thing. I mean, to those who are interested or whatever, there's a lot of videos on YouTube. And of course, you can also watch the excellent Empire of Dreams documentary. That is... It used to be just like a bonus feature or something of the original trilogy when it was released to DVD, but you can just watch that on YouTube now, and yeah, I can't recommend that one enough. But this is the first, I think the first thing where you, as an audience member, whether you just came into it last week or if you were like me that saw it right when it opened in 1977, you instantly know, hey, this is different. This is not your typical sci-fi film. Now, this is especially true back then, because now Star Wars has been so influential that you really, from today's standpoint, you're looking at it more from, oh, this is the original. This is what inspired a lot of movies that I love. But for somebody like me, this was, I mean, this is the first thing that we saw. Like, whoa, all right, reading.
Yeah,
you're gonna,
exactly.
It's like homework assignment. You're going to start me out where I got to read this whole thing. But in a lot of ways, this is actually really ingenious. I mean, when you stop and think about it, it's giving you, instead of having...
Context.
Yeah, exactly, context. Instead of having to shoot a bunch of exposition and all this other stuff and actually eat up a lot of time, you know what? If only the superhero movies followed this plan. This is one of the things I really liked about... I don't remember which Hulk movie it was. But
it was the one with... It was Ed...
Oh, Edward Norton?
Edward Norton.
The one where it just basically gave us the origin of the Hulk kind of in the credits or the opening scene or whatever. Yeah. Because one of my biggest complaints, particularly with Superman and Batman, but this is even true with some of the MCU stuff as well. I mean, look, if it's somebody like Thor, yeah, okay, fine. Give me the whole full-blown origin, because he had never really been on screen before, but... Come on, man. It's like, who at this point doesn't know Batman or Superman's origin? Do we really need to eat up screen time for this?
It's funny that you bring this up, because I just had this conversation with David today. We were talking about movies, and I brought we had this very same conversation about, superhero movies and being the whole origin being overdone. For certain characters, like who doesn't know? Like Superman's plane blew up. He was raised by the Kents. He wanted to fight for true justice in the American way. The Yellow Sun gives him his powers. Blah 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 blah. Batman's parents were killed in the alley. He was a kid. He was upset. He trained himself. Now he's a crime fighter. He drives around in a cool car, beats up people at night, and he's a billionaire. Like, okay, we get it. Like we know that already. But there are certain characters that you don't know their origin. You don't know what motivates them, and so I always thought Marvel was ingenious for taking the time to create their own origin stories for like characters like Iron Man. Okay, you do an origin story Iron Man movie because you're going to do an Avengers movie at the end of it all. So we don't have to sit here and waste a bunch of screen time trying to figure out how all these characters got their abilities and suits and all that. We can just get straight to how they met and then what's the problem, So with Star Wars, with the opening crawl, I thought this was very ingenious. As a kid, I was like, oh, I've never seen a movie start off with text like that. And then the scrolling up. So you're constantly trying to read this thing like really quickly to ingest what you're reading at the same time. And then, you get that after that last note that you hear from the fanfare, you get that tilt down to Star Destroyer pretty much coming across the screen, eating it up, basically.
The Tantive 4 and all that other stuff. But and again, and that's a good point. It's funny that we're talking about the origin story stuff with David, because the other thing that I think that happens sometimes is that you get a situation where every filmmaker wants to tell their version of the origin story. And I think that that's the reason why you get this, repetitive thing where it's like, yes, everybody knows the origin story of Batman, but they haven't seen it the way that I plan to depict it. And that's the thing, is that everybody wants to depict that scene in their own way, because particularly with Batman, but I would say even with Superman and some of the others, the problem is you almost need to, in some ways, tell the origin story, and this is the argument for doing it, because it's going to set the tone for their particular version of the franchise. You know what I'm saying? So it's like,
I can see that.
Because if you just even take all the Batmans, right? Because that's probably the one that there's been the most of. You had Tim Burton's version. You had Christopher Nolan's version. Now you have Matthew Reeves' version. It's like you have all these different versions of Batman, and you have all these different actors playing them, but the actors playing them is somewhat irrelevant. It's really more the tone of the overall franchise, and you basically want to give the origin story that more or less fits that franchise. But where I would argue against that is like, look, if we already know that part of the story, get to the parts of the story we don't know. You can just...
Right. Make my time worthwhile, yeah.
Sure, do a Hulk, or even, what was it, The Amazing Spider-Man? It was one of the Spider-Mans where they just kind of zipped through the whole, it was kind of like another opening credits type of thing, where they just gave us the origin.
A quick flashback or something, yeah.
Sure.
And it's over and done with, yeah.
Or you could even do Man of Steel. The Man of Steel thing, they just didn't even do the origin story. They just, okay, Clark's already, it would really kind of fit within kind of the end of his Smallville time or something.
Right. And that's the thing with the opening crawl. The opening crawl pretty much set the tone. It kind of gave you a synopsis of where we are in time. First it starts off in a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Once again, using those classic story elements that we always talk about. Basically a long time ago in a far away land.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing.
Right. So then you
Once
get this opening crawl. Yeah, and it gives you this whole kind of like the back of the book synopsis of what you're about to see here. And that's essentially what this was. Is like when you read the back of a book and it's like, oh, okay, I think I might buy this, and that's essentially what this is. And I thought that was ingenious to kind of make it kind of come to life. So we get this, we read it, and it's like, okay, now I want to know what a Death Star is. And now, the Galactic Empire, like what the heck is that? And why are they evil? So then now, after that, we get into the movie.
Well, and even before that, it's Because again, and what we're gonna do, obviously, we'll break some of this stuff down, but we're gonna go really through a lot of the story beats, Lucas's influences, stuff like that, and then of course we'll probably circle back, and then especially if you guys start chatting in a bunch of stuff, we'll definitely do it. I mean, I don't know if we really have to do a breakdown of the entire film because it's been around for almost 50 years, but one of the things that I thought was really cool about this film in particular is the fact that it's showing you a universe where you're basically just sort of dropped in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. It's basically like they're treating you like you already know who the Empire is. We talked about this last week, right? What's a Grand Moff? Now, again, that term was never used in the actual... I think they kept referring to him as Governor Tarkin in the film. Yeah. And then it was when you bought the action figures that it's all Grand Moff Tarkin. You're kind of like, okay, Dark Lord of the Sith. And now you're getting these terms where you're like, I don't really know what this is, but it's giving you knowledge to where it's basically assuming you already know what these things are, even though you don't. But the movie's like, just hold on. It's if you just follow this story, it's not gonna be bad. You don't necessarily have to know the origins of the Empire, because during that one scene where Tarkin and those guys are doing their little round table, board meeting or whatever, talking about the Death Star and how they need to use it and everything, they basically are throwing around, the Imperial Senate and the last remnants of the Republic have been swept away. And I mean, if you really stop and think about it, movies today would have actually had a film that just set all this stuff up.
Right.
Now granted, we are in episode 4, so I guess, and maybe that's why Lucas added it. I don't really know why he went back in 1980 and did it, unless it was because he knew that Empire was coming out and he wanted to make clear that, hey, listen, you are being dropped in the middle of this story.
Well, I mean, it's funny that you bring up the whole action figure thing, right? Because just sitting here listening and thinking about it, like, I don't think they ever in the original trilogy actually used the word Sith. Like, we hear Jedi used all the time, but we've never heard the word Sith in the original trilogy.
Yeah, I don't even think in Return of the Jedi.
Exactly.
I don't think so, yeah.
We just always, and so growing up, we just always thought that, like, okay, I mean, essentially, from a certain point of view, I guess you could say that that's what a Sith is just a bad Jedi, like a Jedi who went wrong or something like that. But really, they have their own ideology, they have their own thing and their own culture in a way. And so I was always just led to believe, I mean, and it's true that Anakin Skywalker was a Jedi at one point, and then he went to the dark side. And I just thought that, okay, you just become a bad guy, you just use your powers for evil instead of good. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially what we thought, that all, but then again, none of us question how did the Emperor get like this then? Because we knew Anakin, we heard the story of Anakin being, seduced by the dark side and blah, 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 blah. But then when Yoda starts, and we'll get into that when we talk about Empire, but, when Yoda starts bringing up the Emperor and whatnot, what's this back? We never questioned, was he I mean, how did he become that?
Well, I can tell you this from just at that time. A lot of that stuff, to be fair, was filled in by Lucas. So he would do interviews and everything, during the promotional cycles of each of these films. And he would give us a lot of that knowledge. So even though within the film itself, we never got a lot of this stuff mentioned, we pretty much knew full well going in, what this is really what was going on. Because he did give a lot of this away in interviews. And then even though the expanded universe didn't really come into play until around 91, there were expanded universe-like books. There were Splinters of the Mind's Eye. Splinter of the Mind's Eye was actually going to be Empire Strikes Back if Star Wars didn't make a lot of money. The idea was Lucas created a couple of different things, and he created a script that was a lower budget version that in case he couldn't get a lot of money from the studio, he could have produced the second Star Wars film cheaply. And that ended up, once, the thing made $1 gazillion and they were able to actually make The Empire Strikes Back the way he wanted to, he then released that story. I forgot who actually authored that, but he allowed it to be a book, and it was called Splinter of the Mind's Eye. So there was some quasi-expanded universe content that was out there that did give us more information. But by and large, yeah, if you're just looking at the movies themselves, because, I mean, if you think about it, in this film, the Emperor's mentioned by name, but, it's kind of like, well, the Emperor's, and, in your mind, you're like, yeah, all right, sure, yeah, the Emperor. But we're like, well, who's this guy? Because you accurately said it when we were discussing this movie a long time ago on one of our other shows, where you said, okay, who's this Tarkin guy? Because if Vader's listening to him, and we see how powerful Vader is, well, then what's Tarkin got on him? Right? And then, then you start to put two and two together, and I'm talking strictly in New Hope here. You put two and two together and you say, okay, well, that's because you got the Emperor, right? The Emperor's the guy in charge. Well, now your mind starts going, well, who's this Emperor guy? Because Vader seems to be doing fine on his own. So who's pulling his leash?
Right.
Not to quote Leia here, but
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about, like I said, this in 1977, you got this monstrosity of a film. You got this opening crawl. You have these great characters that we get introduced to, and of course, Tarkin is being one of them. Tarkin pretty much is the commanding officer. He's pretty much like the overall commanding officer of the military of the Empire. I mean, Vader is kind of like the second hand to the Emperor, but Tarkin is his his left hand guy. Like, that's his other main authority. And he's not a Jedi, or was a Jedi. He was not a Sith Lord. He doesn't even use the Force, right? He's just a military mind, and he's just very regal and very very tough and stern. He has a very commanding presence, and I think that character alone is really cool. But the main characters that we eventually get into are Han, Luke, and Leia, and Vader, and we'll break down those characters. But I didn't realize this, but I had to kind of do a quick Google search, that I'm used to Star Wars making piles of money now, and I knew it made a pile of money back then in 1977.
Oh yeah,
I just didn't know how much it made back then. I was like, dude, it was close to $1 billion.
Yeah. Now keep this in mind.
1977.
So here's
that's
the
when
thing.
the dollar was stronger. That's what just blows my mind.
The dollar was stronger, so that was a big thing. But here's the other thing to keep in mind, and this is what makes it even more mind blowing when you think of, back then. $5 back then would be more like $20 today or something stupid like that. I think, or maybe even 30. I think that the dollar was 6 times more valuable back then or something like that. So that's number one. Number two, keep this in mind. Tickets were $3. That's the thing that you have to really keep in mind. When everybody goes, oh, well, this movie made, including the later Star Wars films. Oh, it made like $1 billion or something. Well, okay, yeah. When tickets are like, $15 a ticket, it's a lot easier to do than when tickets are $3.
And to add to that point, a lot of theaters, right? So we go to these theaters, like I'll just use Michigan for an example. We have Imagine theaters, we have Star theaters, we have AMC theaters, all right, and MJR. And those theaters generally have maybe about 10 to 15 screens in them. But back in 1977, you know, you didn't have as many screens in one particular building.
Right, which means they couldn't show, they couldn't tie up, say, like 5 screens or something.
5 screens. So you just got to think about, like, this movie was like an occupying force, basically.
Well, not only that, but there weren't even as many theaters back then, right? I mean, it wasn't even just how many screens. It just wasn't as many.
Yeah. So when you really think of the grand scope of it, I mean, Star Wars made $775 million in 1977.
Well, it was totally a cultural phenomenon. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and here's why.
Here's why. So when we get into this, so you started mentioning, that we're going to start breaking down some of these people. So, of course, we always talk about how this movie was the hero's journey. It basically ties this little story trope together. And so, we're introduced, I mean, really, technically, we're introduced to Leia first. But when you really break this down to what it's about, because, and we'll get to the droid soon, because really this movie is told through their eyes, and that was another Kurosawa, or I forgot, I think that's the guy's name. Lucas had multiple influences, and that was one of them. And one of them was, and again, we'll get to this more when we get to the droids, but it was basically told through their perspective. But the hero was Luke Skywalker. And this is basically, again, the hero's journey thing, to where you have, a young man is taken under the wing of a wizened sage type character, and he has to face insurmountable odds and pretty much save the day. Lord of the Rings is another good example of that with Frodo. Where it's kind of like somebody, it's kind of like if you take the coming of age type of storyline and you mix it with action and adventure, you get really the hero's journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Luke Skywalker is, prototypical hero. Basically, he's a dreamer. He wants to do great things. He feels like his life is supposed to be more than just being a farm boy, because he lives on Tatooine and he's a farmer, which is kind of weird because the planet is
it's a desert.
Sand. Yeah, it's a desert planet.
That's why they say, they always farm, and they always say moisture farmer. And it's funny because there's a lot of things when I was a kid, and this is definitely worth mentioning here. There's a lot of things that when I was a kid, I really didn't understand. I really wasn't getting some of the terminology. I heard them in the film say moisture farmer, but that didn't really click. I didn't really understand what they were talking about. And it wasn't until later on that I really started getting what that really means. And there was a lot of things, of course, because keep in mind, I saw this thing when I was 6 years old when it came out. So, I mean, I was closer to 7 than I was to 6. I was maybe 3 months away from my 7th birthday, but still, I was a really little kid when this thing came out. And I know you, likewise, you weren't as young as I was, but close. I mean, you got into this thing in like 91, 92, so you're about 7 years old. So, again, there's certain things that you get overall, like on a macro level when you're a child. You get the themes that Lucas was trying to explore, but as you get older, and this is one of the reasons why I think Star Wars is so endearing and long-lasting, is because you can always get something new out of it. Now, I don't know if I've gotten anything new out of it, after maybe 25 or 30 years old, but still, right? I'm 52. Maybe if I'm 60, you start to relate to different characters, right? Like when you're younger, you relate to Luke Skywalker. Well, now I'm entering into that Obi-Wan Kenobi range. Where you start to go, hey, I can relate to some of the things that he's talking about now. So,
right.
I think in different stages of life, you begin to relate to different, not just different characters, but different elements. Or maybe you, from the time you're a child to the time maybe you're like 20, 25 years old, you start to have that deeper understanding of the source material.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, a lot of people identify with Luke Skywalker, especially the younger generation, because he's the young, brazen kid. He wants to go out and tackle the world. He feels like his life is, but he just doesn't know how he's going to ever get away from being this moisture farmer because his uncle won't let him join up with the rest of his friends who have joined the Imperial Academy. Which is funny because, setting the backdrop of all of this, Luke is on Tatooine for a reason. He's there because he's supposed to be being hidden from the Empire. The Empire is, as we all often say, it's the government. It's fascist in nature, and they're trying to hide Luke from Vader. Now, as you guys can see, the hat that I'm wearing is on this side, it's the Imperial insignia, and then on the other side is the Rebels. So, with the Empire, they're this dominating force. They're the government. They're very, like I said, fascist in nature, and they're led. One of the top leaders of the Empire is Vader, and Vader is unaware that Luke Skywalker, who is his son, even exists. He doesn't even know that he has a son at this point. So, if Luke were to go into the Imperial Academy, and he was able to display unknowingly some of his force-like abilities, it may draw the attention of Vader, and Vader might want to train him to become a Sith. And that was really spelled doom for the galaxy, because now you have 3 big Sith Lords essentially running the country. I mean, the galaxy.
Well, and 2 of which are direct descendants of the Force, basically.
Exactly. So that makes them super powerful.
Yeah, so that would be super powerful. And of course, it should be noted that, and I keep forgetting the timeline of this thing, I think it was sometime between Return of the Jedi's release and the first Timothy Zahn novel in 91, which of course kicked off the expanded universe. And that was a Dark Horse comic series that explored Luke actually taking the Emperor's offer and becoming a Sith Lord and taking over for his dad, basically. It was kind of like one of those what-if scenarios. But absolutely. And again, I mean, it's really kind of funny when we talk about this, because obviously Luke, through the expanded universe mostly, really grew to be one of my favorite characters. But from A New Hope, I didn't hate him. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Just didn't connect with me. Han Solo did, Luke Skywalker didn't. And I don't know, maybe it was because I just found the character to be a little bit too classic storytelling, too predictable to me. He became far more interesting in Empire Strikes Back, which of course I'm sure we'll talk about to death when we get to that movie next week. But yeah, I just think that so far, and again, he's not a bad character, and he was excellently played by Hamill. And I mean, let's face it, none of these guys really knew what to do with this material. Harrison Ford infinitely basically said, look, you can write this stuff, but you can't say it. I mean, it was, for an actor, it was really hard because nobody even knew. And that's why they were all completely surprised by the performance of this movie, because, when they were looking at it, this thing was just like some hokey little sci-fi nothing thing that nobody even understood what it was from scene to scene. And it was really confusing to them. They just had no idea. Alec Guinness famously said that the dialogue was rubbish. And everybody just figured, okay, this would be some nothing little film. Now, Alec Guinness, though, had the presence of mind to actually ask for a percentage of the gross, which turned out to be an extremely good decision on his part. But as far as the characters go, somebody like Mark Hamill here just pretty much had to do the best he can with what he had. And all those guys, I thought, as we get into all these characters and the role that they play and the classic character type, storytelling type that they play in this thing, enough cannot be said about their performance and how they pulled this off, because this is a really weird little film. I mean, it's easy for us to go back now, but when they were making this thing, it's like, I don't even know what this is.
Yeah, I mean, Luke Skywalker's character was very, as you said, prototypical. Just lost boy. And he was just trying to find his way in the world, and he wants to make this whole difference. And like I said, he doesn't really truly understand why his uncle is holding him back. And then you have him just trying to figure out life, and eventually he gets set upon this adventure as he meets up with these other characters that we're gonna get into next. So
yeah, well, I mean,
guess
with
we
that,
kind of set the tone for Luke.
Yeah, so that's basically Luke. So next, of course, we have Princess Leia. Now, Leia basically plays the damsel in distress. Although, it should be stated here, though, that Lucas went a little bit against type here.
Yeah,
and he basically, even though that's somewhat, if you had to put her in the classic storytelling compartment, this is what she represents. I mean, there have been people that try to argue with me on this, and I'm like, look, guys, she's basically saying, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. I mean, she's clearly in distress. She's being tortured by the Empire. She's caught in a cell that Han and Luke basically rescue her out of. So, yes, this is the space version of being, locked up in a tower. Exactly. So, but she does actually play this differently, and she's written differently. She's written as a strong character, and this is one of the first times in cinematic history. I mean, I'm sure that film students would come up to me and say, well, there was this 1927 film that it's like, I get that. Okay, I'm not basically saying that she's the first ever strong movie lead or anything like that, but definitely in pop culture and in blockbuster films, of which this is only the second technical blockbuster film, Jaws being the first, where it's kind of like a mega thing, right? This is definitely one of the first depictions of the damsel in distress character where she's actually saving the lives of her captor, her rescuers.
Yeah, I mean, Leia, man, she's the personification of girl power, if you want to, simply put.
Yes.
And the thing is, she's not like, oh, Luke, Han, thank you. She's just like, Leia has some mouth on her, man. Leia is feisty, and that's the thing.
Well, and that's it. One of the things that actually cracked me up, and I'm talking when I first saw this movie too, by the way, as like a 6-year-old, was the fact that, Han's at this point, because remember, he didn't even want to do this in the first place. He didn't even want to go in and rescue her. It was kind of Luke that convinced him to, by, well, look, she's rich, she's got a lot of money, and, Han being in debt to Jabba, that sounded good to him. But
that's very profitable.
Yeah, he was beginning to regret it right away. Like when he was like, no reward is worth this. And this is one of the things that I thought was good, was the dialogue in this film is just so natural, so organic in the way that the humor is played out. And it's relatable. It's not out of place in this universe.
Right.
But it's so motivated by the scene rather than them trying to come up with punchlines to where you would almost expect a laugh track like what we saw in later Star Wars films.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we first see even aboard a Tantive 4 when Vader walks on, right? And she's popping off at him. Now, mind you, Vader is about 7 feet tall. He's probably about 400 pounds mechanically speaking. He's a very big, imposing guy.
Well, we just saw him choking a dude out too.
Yeah,
with one hand, counselorship. Where's your ambassador? I mean,
yeah, we just see him. Yeah, when Vader steps on the scene. I mean, we'll get to him in a moment.
Yeah,
but Vader's got this guy by the throat, man. A whole man lifted with one hand by the throat. Now, granted, I'm thinking that this is all body like this, but later on we find out that he's mechanical. But nonetheless, though, that even makes it even more threatening, though. And so Leia being who she is, she's very feisty. She's quick. She has quick wit. She's a take charge kind of person. And, we don't really get a chance to see where that really truly comes from. But we see that in later films and other depictions in the novels. We understand why Leia is that way, because she's been a leader since she was probably 13 or 14 years old.
That's
being
true.
a senator. So she's had to argue and go up against people that's bigger than her.
And I mean, that's true. Even though the context is filled out, I will say that is one thing that is actually present in this film. They do refer to her as senator. I mean, it's clear that she's a senator, and, you don't really understand yet the true nature of Vader, Tarkin, and all these guys. It's a little bit more, I guess you could just say it was more like, it was vague. It wasn't until later that you go back to that scene and you're like, whoa, she's okay. This is, but it's true. I mean, in her scene with Vader and Tarkin, where she's just kind of popping off to him because she doesn't understand the danger that she's in. She's still thinking that this is like, okay, you guys are clearly violating whatever. She has no idea that, no, this whole like Imperial Senate thing that you've been a part of is kind of a puppet thing, and you're in a lot of trouble. The Emperor that you love so much is a Sith Lord, and on it goes. But then later on, when she's going to Chewbacca, well, you get this walking carpet out of my way. I mean, she's just so delightfully honest and short-tempered, I guess.
Yeah.
Not appreciative at all.
Yeah, and then, the fact that just all of her lines out the gate, she's just she shows you that she's not afraid. And that's the thing. She's fearless. That's one thing you can say about Leia. She's fearless. So, when Han, she's like, move out of the way, flyboy. She's, or the fact that when Luke, opens the door, she's laying there, basically taking a nap, and Luke is there to rescue her. And before he can even say anything to her, she's already like, "Aren't you a little short for a storm?" I mean, she's already just being.
What's funny about that? What's funny about that whole, like, when you take it from that point all the way through the, into the garbage chute fly, but like all the way through the whole thing, she's almost irritated that these losers are the ones that are rescuing her.
Right.
It's like, really? This is who Obi-Wan sent? Really? Because these guys couldn't rescue themselves. And that's one of those things that I thought was just so incredible about her character, is that she completely turned that damsel in distress thing around on them, where it's like, okay, you guys are clueless. I'm gonna have to actually do this.
Let me show you guys how to do this.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, and that's the thing about Leia. She's spunky. That's the best. I think that's just the best way to classify her. She's a very spunky. So she's not your typical damsel. She's not even that typical blonde where she's just like, oh, she's very beautiful, but she's like, look, I'm not afraid. I'm not, you're not going to just bully me. I'm going to stand up for myself. And so that's what makes Princess Leia so cool. And that was the cool thing that George Lucas did. He made it so young girls who wanted to get into Star Wars had someone that they could look up to.
Yeah, which I thought was a really, really good thing. And then, of course, that brings us next to Han Solo. Now, you could call him the anti-hero. He's really more the rogue. He's that reluctant hero. He's the guy.
Yeah.
He's the more seasoned but yet jaded version of Luke. He's the guy that's really in for it himself. And again, you'd see this all the time, to where on the hero's journey, the hero runs into an older, more seasoned guy, and then, in fact, in Solo, a Star Wars story, it's one of the things that I think is really interesting about that film, and it's something that I think really escapes people, and it was something that, and I'm not sure if Lord Miller did this or if Ron Howard did this, but essentially what happened was they took the hero's journey and they made Han the hero. And so now Han's the guy who's on the hero's journey, And Woody Harrelson's character becomes the rogue or the guy who's the seasoned veteran guy who is then going to show Han the ropes. Of course, the difference is where Han never betrayed Luke, Woody Harrelson's character did. What was it, Beckett or something like that?
Yeah, Beckett.
So I thought that this is an interesting thing too. And of course, Han, infamously, he was my favorite character. As soon as he shot Greedo, he's walking out, he kind of tosses that coin to the bartender and says, sorry about the mess, and kind of walks off. He's kind of like that John Wayne. He has that ultra confidence, that swagger. He's been through something, but he doesn't seem to sweat anything. He had the ultimate attitude, and he's got a sense of humor. He kind of jokes about everything. So instantly I was drawn to him personally.
Yeah, Han Solo had definitely grew to be one of my favorite characters just because, I love his, I love his brashness, his, the faces that he makes sometimes when things, don't go wrong or sound funny to him. His reactions to things are just hilarious to me. But yeah, he definitely carries that confidence. He's the man that, your mom kind of wants you to marry because he's got it figured out. Nothing phases him. He's knowledgeable. He's very knowledgeable about the world, but Han is a smuggler. And he's kind of on the edge. You're right. He's not necessarily an anti-hero. He's not really a hero per se. He's a hero when necessary, or out of a matter of convenience, if you will. But
that's why I say he's more the reluctant hero. He's
definitely a reluctant hero.
Kind of has to be dragged into it. It's like, oh, this princess of yours. He doesn't really want to. He doesn't want to rescue her. It's kind of like he's dragged into it. It's like, oh, she's rich. I mean, she could give you a lot of money. All right.
Like, yeah, fine. What am I getting out of this? Basically, it's like, if it doesn't benefit me, why am I doing it? And that's his motivation for things.
Yes, and that's what I thought was so interesting about his story arc, was because, as you know, he is motivated by selfishness, and once he gets his reward, he's about to go off, and then at the last second, when everybody needs him most, he comes back, and saves the day, and that's
one thing about him. He has a heart, like he's one of those type of guys where he realizes, like, you know what, these guys are going to be, I know I can help, and let me just do this one thing and do them a solid or whatever. I see what's going on here, and he's been affected by the Empire too.
Sure.
The other thing about Han is that he's, some of his qualities and great traits. He's an amazing pilot. And he's a fantastic shot, as we see by this wonderful picture. And there's even a book called The Last Shot, where, Han Solo is like one of the fastest gunmen in the, like you say, he's got that John Wayne vibe, swagger to him. So a blaster is really, he even tells Luke, all this hokey religion is no match for having a good blaster at your side, something to that effect. So, he's kind of dismissive towards Luke and Obi-Wan with the whole Force thing. Like, he doesn't believe in it. He doesn't think
episode
that
7.
Right. He doesn't believe that this whole mystical thing, because at this point in time, the Jedi have been eradicated from everyone's way of life for years at this point. So now people are just kind of like, okay, well, they're gone, so you don't hear or see their actions anymore. So eventually people just forget about it and don't even really recognize them. And for Han, he's like, yeah, that's a bunch of hogwash, but of course later on, he runs into Obi-Wan and watching Luke try to train on his ship. There's some displays of the Force there, but Han just chalks it up to luck. He's like, that's just luck, man. All right, this thing's been kicking your butt. You got a couple of good shots in. Yeah, whatever. You didn't impress me. So that, I think Han's character is really, like I said, part of it's comedic relief. Part of it is that more old, and I think, like I said, Star Wars being for everybody, Han's character kind of represents what dads would feel.
Well, I also think he's really the guy that I think represents the audience, because he's sort of seeing this thing unfold with us. So I would almost say that his point of view is most representative of the audience.
Okay, I could see that. I also think it's more so like a father, like, you know, you go into the movie with your dad to go see this. You know, he's that, and that's how a dad would want to, you know, handle certain situations. It's just cool, calm, collected. You know, like it's a bunch of crap. You know, whatever.
Well, nothing worries.
Dads could be like that. Yeah, nothing worries him at all.
And I think that,
but he's good at what he does.
Well, very good, and that's actually what I was going to bring up, is the fact that he is considered to not only be probably the best marksman in the galaxy, but also the best pilot. And of course, later on, you know, you see Anakin, you see Luke, you see all these guys, but remember, they're Jedi. They have the Force. Han doesn't have the Force. So
exactly,
that makes pretty much what he could do even more spectacular. But the thing that I find really cool, too, is that obviously A New Hope is the beginning of his story arc. It's his introduction. It's where he begins in the greater story. And I love that, because, yeah, you know, first he's kind of like, this hokey religion is no match for a blaster at your side. And, you know, I call it luck, you know, and I mean, he's doing that. Then by episode 7, he's like, nope, the Force, it's all true. It's all, you know, it's
all of it. You know?
All of it. It's all true. It's, you know, I mean, honestly, that's still probably my favorite scene. Every time when he's talking about that, or when, you know, he goes to Finn, like, that's not how the Force works. I mean, that was just, I loved it because it was Han Solo talking about the Force and Jedi and Sith Lords. And, you know, it's like, it's just so odd. And this is why, because we know from A New Hope what his deal was from the very beginning.
Oh, yeah.
So,
well, one of my favorite lines from him was, I think it was from A New Hope. You know, it was basically, you know, I don't think attacking that Death Star is like, it's something that's like, well, I forgot what the other person said. He was like, it's more like suicide or something like that. Like, you know, attacking the thing is not heroic. It's more like suicide. Like, you're stupid for trying to go up against this thing, you know. And I love the fact that Han try to keep things grounded for people. Like, you guys really don't understand. Like, this, why are you guys trying to fight this thing? Just get away from it. That's what you should be doing.
Well, that's what I'm saying. See, that's why I say he represents the audience, because his audience members, when they're talking about, well, you know, let's go, we're kind of like, I don't know, man. I'm looking at your ship and I'm looking at that. I'm just saying, I don't know. I know that I'm new to this universe, but yeah. I mean, maybe the laws of physics are a little bit different over there in that galaxy far, far away, but I don't think so.
Well, I think they just figure, like, it's either now or never. We got to stop this thing before it blows up in other more planets, you know.
I mean, that's, you know, and that's the thing. But that's why I say I think that Han comes in with more the audience perspective. All right, so then after him, of course, we have his trusty sidekick, Chewbacca. You know, what's a reluctant hero without a sidekick? And a lot of times I think that people just look at Chewbacca as the growling, annoying, you know, character or whatever. But you could see, even from the few scenes that they were in, that Han and Chewie had this bond. And it was endearing, actually. And it was... I remember even when I was a kid watching this thing for the first time, if they had just made a spin-off film about Han and Chewie, I would have been all about it. Completely. Yeah. Because there was a chemistry there.
Yeah, Chewie's definitely the muscle to Han's brain.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Han is very cunning. He's very swift. You know, he's quick-witted. You know, he's on it. Where Chewie is just like, he's so imposing. You know, you got this 7-foot basically dog. It's just standing. I mean, this is almost like if you walked up one of those huge, like Alaskan Siberian Huskies or something like that, but that's just like 3 times bigger.
Right.
like that's
those dogs
kinda,
that you could practically ride. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. You're like, okay, I don't think I want this thing angry at me. And then of course he's super strong. They're known for pulling people's arms out of people's sockets and everything like that. And Chewie is but he's very loving and tender at the same time, and that's the cool thing about that character. He doesn't have, and he doesn't say any English words, obviously, because he's a Wookiee, but the way that he interacts with Han is so funny because you almost get inference from Han. So Chewie will let out some growl or something like that, and then Han will respond in kind with some joke or basically in response to whatever Chewie just growled about. And it gives you context to the personality of Chewbacca.
Well, not only that, but it also gives you context, like you said, what he's saying, the scene, the overall dynamic, a lot of the different things. But the other thing that I think is important to point out, too, that goes in with all of that is the fact that Chewbacca, while he could be seen as the muscle, and he's also the one who, in some ways, is that grounded influence. He's the one that actually will get Han out of a lot of jams and out of a lot of trouble, and maybe provide counter arguments and everything like that, to where Han is a little bit more brash and just, let's just go and do it, where Chewbacca's a little bit more cautious and, he seems to think things through on this whole thing. And I think sometimes that's what people miss. I think that that's a little bit more obvious as the films go on, but you see that even in A New Hope. One of the biggest examples is when, Han decides to rush all those stormtroopers, and Chewbacca just kind of looks back and just shrugs and then goes after him. Like, well, all right, this is kind of stupid, but I got to protect him. It's like, right. I guess this is what we're doing now. And it's great because Chewbacca does end up getting Han out of a lot of situations that we actually see.
And into some.
And into some. Yeah, and into some. And he's also sort of that voice of reason. That's really the term I was looking for, because you see them arguing even after Obi-Wan and, Ben in this one, right, and Luke leave when they hire him to fly him to Alderaan. You could see that they're kind of debating, and he's like, oh, this could save our necks and all this stuff. And there was a little bit, not too much, but a little bit of back and forth on that. Like, can we trust him?
Yeah, Chewie is definitely, like I said, their byplay is hilarious. Like,
oh yeah,
they're going to the garbage chute, and then Han's like, I don't care what you smell, get in there. That was hilarious. Just their very brotherly nature with each other. It's definitely there. Their chemistry is unmatched. Some of the highlights about Chewie too, though, like, okay, he's incredibly strong. He's very grounded. He's got the voice of reason, like you said. The other thing is he's the co-pilot to the Millennium Falcon, and he's a somewhat able mechanic. A lot of times we'll see Chewbacca. He's tinkering and trying to fix things on the Millennium Falcon to make sure it's ready to go when they need to, while Han is off being Han, basically. So Chewie's kind of like you said, he's very the grounded character. He does provide some comedic relief, especially even in the sequel trilogy with the porgs. That was hilarious.
Oh man, that was so funny. Especially when he had that one in his mouth and then he spits it out.
He looks at the rest of them. They're just
a little bit of Grogu there. I thought, it's kind of like Grogu with his little eggs
on their face.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I know.
So,
yeah, the porg are amazing.
So yeah, but that's Chewbacca. That's pretty much
right. And so now of course we get into Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Ben Kenobi, and he's, like I pointed out earlier, he's the sage, he's the wizard, he's the wizened. There's different applications when you're dealing with the hero's journey storyline, but it always has like an older, wiser character that's sort of been there, done that, and is providing guidance to our budding hero. And that's the part that Obi-Wan plays.
Yeah. Obi-Wan Kenobi, he was sent to watch over Luke and protect him as he grows up on Tatooine until he was at a suitable age where Obi-Wan could start beginning to train him in the ways of the Force and becoming a Jedi himself. That, and it's funny because, you know, I brought up the point of like, at what point was he going to do it? Because like Luke was at this point like 19 years old. I mean, if his uncle would have let him go off to the academy, then what? I mean, you kind of failed, dude, again.
Well, and I start to wonder, and maybe the Obi-Wan series started to explain this, although again, they couldn't. You know, he only had 6 episodes, which again, just see our Obi-Wan review for the critique on only 6 episodes. But I think that what they were trying to somewhat infer with that one younger Obi-Wan Uncle Owen scene was the fact that I think Obi-Wan maybe wanted to try to do some stuff, but Owen kept blocking him. And it was basically once Owen and Lars were barbecuing on the front porch of their homestead that Obi-Wan's like, yeah, so now you can learn the ways of the Force. And I think a lot of that, we thought when we're watching A New Hope for the first time that whole thing was like, well, okay, now your parents are toast. You might as well just get on the ship over here. But I think a lot of that, when you really start to understand this franchise a little bit deeper, it's really all the obstacles that Luke had are removed.
Exactly.
You know, and that was the final thing where it's like, okay, dude, nothing's really stopping you at this point. So now I can introduce
guidance in life. Yeah.
Sure, because think about this. If Obi-Wan had introduced a lot of these concepts to him when he was younger, but he didn't have the freedom to really train him, Luke could have started inching toward the dark side without Obi-Wan constantly being able to be that influence on him. And so maybe that's part of the reason why he waited. Although, you know, it's kind of like, all right, the whole fate of the galaxy is resting on your shoulders. What are you going to do, wait till he's 30? I mean...
Right, exactly.
And like you said, what if he had gone to the academy? Oops. I mean, granted, I guess he could have gotten a ship. And again, a lot of what we know about Obi-Wan is thanks to the prequels and then all this other stuff. It's gotten to the point now where I remember when I first saw Ewan McGregor going, wow, that's kind of weird seeing him, you know? You're just so used to Alec Guinness, and now it's the opposite. You know, now to everybody, Ewan McGregor is Obi-Wan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, with Obi-Wan's character, you know, he's a very, as you aforementioned, very wise, very sage. He gives Luke guidance as needed. You know, he understands where Luke is in life, and he's trying to manage his excitement. You know, he tells, you know, you must learn the ways of the Force if you to come to meet Alderaan. And, you know, he kind of told him the story about what happened to his father. And I don't think Obi-Wan was really prepared at that moment to really discuss that. He kind of took that deep sigh and kind of like, okay, how can I explain this? You know, without deviating from my plan, what I have for you. So he basically said, well, you know, this young pupil by the name of Darth Vader betrayed and killed and murdered your father. And as we saw in the Obi-Wan series, it was true, because Vader himself said, you know, you didn't destroy Anakin Skywalker, I did. And it was basically, you know, and that was the first time.
Meanwhile, Obi-Wan's all like, ooh, yeah, thank you. I'm going to hold on to that one.
Right.
You, sir, just gave me the explanation to your kid that I'm going to have to. You just turned a difficult conversation into something real simple.
Right. And, you know, he basically told him, like, you know, and that's the first time you hear Obi-Wan call him Darth. You know, it was just like, man.
Yeah, but I mean, in a lot of that, you know, some of this is on the nose, too, because it's like, look, they're just trying to retcon everything that Lucas botched up in 4 when he just thought he was making a couple of films and it turned into this beloved franchise. And it's like, well, crap, now I got to I got to explain everything.
Explain all this,
and
right.
it's like, well, because of course you have some geeky kid that raises hand during a convention and says, oh, how come his name was Darth? Why did he call him Darth? And it's just like, I mean, Lucas, you got to love him because on one hand, he loves the fans. He loves the fact that everybody gets into it. On the other hand, it's just like, he's just like, dude, look, it's a film. It's a movie. It's not that serious. It's okay. Just take a breath. Go find a girlfriend, that kind of thing. So definitely I think that that's true. But while they were trying to retcon, I think, a lot of things that happened in episode 4, one of the things that you and I always pointed out, and this is particularly in the case of Obi-Wan when he's describing the Force and everything else, is that episode 4, more than any of them, really relied more on the fantasy thing. The hero's journey is generally a fantasy thing, although it is a general storytelling thing. It's usually applied to fantasy. And a lot of the more macro, vague descriptions where it's like broad strokes, right, to describe the Force. And then, of course, by the time you get to episode 1, well, now it becomes very micro and very sci-fi. And, you went from it binds us and it's in every living being and all this other stuff to all of a sudden, well, there's a blood test we can give you and there's a midi-chlorian count. And, it's like if you're between 1,000 and 6,000, then, you get stuff like that where you're just like, yeah, man, that's not. And what's ironic was it was Lucas that came up with that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the one thing they did right, I think, in the sequel trilogy was kind of like, yep, that's done. Nope. Although they did come up with that M level or something, right? For Mandalorian.
They just called it M. Yeah, they just said M count. We knew what that meant, but
yeah, we knew what that meant. It's like you're not fooling anybody with the M count. It's not magnesium. All right. It's
so, that's the cool thing about Obi-Wan is that Obi-Wan is just, like we said, he's the sage, wise master. He taught Anakin Skywalker, who was Luke Skywalker's father. He was sent to Tatooine to watch over Luke and to help him matriculate into becoming a Jedi. He eventually, gives him bits of wisdom along the way, kind of shows him little different aspects of the Force, such as the having influence over the weak-minded, being able to predict certain actions by using the Force with the whole training orb that he had on the
Falcon. Yeah, that whole training orb scene was genius because once again, it explained what we needed to know about the Force in a context. It wasn't like, here, sit on my knee and I'm going to tell you all about the Force. It was It was in a situation and it made sense and we got just enough. It wasn't over, expository. It was just enough that we understood. And that was one of the things that I think Lucas did right, particularly in this film.
Yeah, because he said, the Force, influences you, but it also obeys your commands, and so it gives you the relationship of that the user of the Force has with the Force. And
right. I mean, Luke basically said, "Oh, it controls your actions," and he was like, "Well, partially, but it also obeys your commands. It gives you like, oh, so it can sort of guide you where you need it, but it can also do what you tell it to."
Right. It's bi-directional, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, it's really cool that way. And then, of course, later on during the lightsaber duel with Vader, between he and Vader, and, he starts going, well, if you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you could possibly imagine. And, of course, he does. We don't know what that means till the next movie. See, the thing that's really cool
actually, it's within the same movie.
Yeah,
really.
Kind of. I mean, I guess. Yeah. Kind of. Yeah, it's like, yeah.
It doesn't come out to true fruition until Empire. But
no. And, of course, we'll deal with that even more so in Empire. But one of the things that I really wanted to bring up about it in this film, and you're right, because he becomes that disembodied voice, run, Luke, run, and all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. You get it's the setup. That's really what this movie becomes. It's the setup. It's setting up the concepts that are going to be very important in not only just the next movie, but the entire franchise. And when, of course, Lucas backpedals and go, hey, remember those little Jedi that were running around? There was only like 2 of them. Well, now there's like thousands of them. And now I'm going to show you what it was like, when they were somewhat in full force. Not quite the High Republic, but, they were still, it's still pretty powerful. All right, so now we go to the droids, C-3PO and R2-D2. Now, they seem like these minor characters, but their importance can't be understated because, again, Lucas was influenced by this particular style of storytelling to where you actually have a couple of minor characters be the window to the story for the audience. It's like you're basically seeing it through their eyes. They become the narrators. Maybe not so much as an oratory thing, so it's not like 3PO is giving voiceovers or something, periodically, but it's you're basically following these guys. Because remember, like what I said, pretty much the opening scene, you're seeing the Tantive 4, it's being shot by this seemingly endless Star Destroyer to give you the thing like, okay, there's a really big ship after this really little ship. That's what you walk away from. And these are the guys, or droids, if you will, that we begin the journey with these guys.
Right.
They go into the escape pod. We don't know what's happening on the ship. We're following them. We're following them in the desert.
Right.
We meet Luke through these guys. We meet Obi-Wan through these guys. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. R2-D2 and 3PO, just some quick things about them. 3PO is what you call a protocol and etiquette droid. He's basically trained for those specific things. He's familiar in over 6 million forms of communications, meaning that he can talk to 6 million different types of life forms or read different types of text and things of that nature. So he becomes super useful because he knows customs and things like that. So because he was at once in this Padme droid. Well, he was actually built by Anakin, but he became Padme's kind of right hand because with her being a senator, she's encountering all these different life forms and aliens and who have different rituals and different beliefs and customs and speaking. And so, instead of trying to learn all that stuff, it's kind of programmed into her droid to be able to interpret and tell her what needs to be done in the proper way of doing so. So that's what 3PO comes into play. R2 is an astromech droid. R2 pretty much is the handyman. He's a giant Swiss Army knife shaped like a trash can. So he has all these different attachments in his body. He can do different things. He can, he can stream. He can stream video of Princess Leia to Luke and Obi-Wan.
You know what? He could do whatever the scriptwriters need him to do at that moment.
Right.
Because that was the only problem, honestly, that I had with these guys, is the fact that it's, R2, it came down to he was pretty reasonable in A New Hope, and then some stuff developed, where by Return of the Jedi, he's got some little buzzsaw blade that he can come out with. Then you go back to the prequels, now he's got, like, jetpacks, and, it's like, all right, man. And then, of course, 3PO was the same thing. He starts out being a protocol droid, and you can sort of hang with the fact that, yes, this guy, okay, he is gaining experience through being with Padme. That's actually a very good point. He's gaining experience being with Padme, being a senator, and here's my problem. He's essentially going from that, which is fine, to by episode 9, now he can suddenly read the Sith language, and it's like, I'm like, okay, dude. Well,
I mean, that's part of his communication, though. I mean, you kind of have to give it to him
but it's just kind of like, and I get it. You could really go back and say that he's never, but look, there was Sith stuff in Palpatine's office. There were Sith scripts. 3PO should have just, now I get it, he had to, like, bypass his, we don't know when that was done either. It's like, at some point between the time he was built by Anakin, which was episode 1, by the way, somewhere along the line, he was programmed to read Sith. So when did that happen? And why didn't he notice it when it was scrawled all over Palpatine's office? Where Palpatine was almost trying to scream to everybody, hey, I'm a Sith Lord, but none of you could read this. So, I get it.
But 3PO wasn't in Palpatine's office, though.
Sure he was. Padme was in there all the time. He was in there.
I don't think so.
Leave in the comment section. We'll rewatch it, of course, because we're doing all these movies anyway. Although I will say, I did not rewatch A New Hope before doing this show. Because I didn't have to.
Well, I mean, you don't have to, yeah. I mean,
you know, I've seen this one like hundreds and hundreds of times. It's like I could practically like recite every single scene from this film. I thought about it, though. I thought about going back and saying, you know what? Well, maybe I'm missing something. I'm thinking, 52 now was 6 when I saw this. Yeah, no, I'm not missing anything. So, all right, that aside, yes, I will concede reluctantly the fact that, okay, there's some growth here that's probably somewhat convenient. But you could really say that with almost all the characters too, right? So I'll just let it go. But that's basically their primary function. They're also a little bit comic relief. And honestly, I thought
like
that
bickering married couple.
Sure. I mean, the only thing that I will say about these guys, and again, I'm going to definitely bring this up when we do episode 1. When we do The Phantom Menace, I'm really going to spend some time on this because the fact that Anakin built 3PO, the fact that, R2 just happened to be on Padme's ship and he was the one astromech droid that didn't get, shot immediately, little convenient to me. It's like you didn't have to try that hard to shoehorn R2 and 3PO in there. You could have done it in a little bit less fantastic way, Okay. But although, that said, though, I did think it was kind of cool that Vader eventually is the one that builds 3PO. And there's always that back and forth between, is that the reason why he shoved Boba Fett's gun down in Empire Strikes Back? Which, of course, we'll deal with that more when we do the next movie, but just keep that one in your minds. And speaking of which, Vader, the villain.
My guy.
This is where we basically first see him. Yes. And I'll never forget, the stormtroopers bust through and they're shooting him. And I thought the stormtroopers look really cool, too, by the way. I love the way the stormtroopers look. I was completely enamored with these guys when I saw them in A New Hope for the very first time at 6 years old. But then, that dun, 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 and then Vader walks in, and all he does is just kind of looks around, surveys the damage, breathing heavily, and moves on. You're like, who's this guy? Now, let me ask you this, because you saw this a number of years later, so there was, Star Wars is out, but you still hadn't seen the films, and I don't know how much you were exposed to stuff. Did you think that Vader was a droid when you first saw him?
No.
Okay, see, we did. Because, look.
Because the breastplate and the belt and everything.
Sure, and the mask and all that stuff. It took a minute, right? Like, eventually we started to see, like, okay, well, maybe not. But first impression, thinking it's a droid.
Well, I think the reason why I didn't think he was a droid is because within universe, he didn't move like. You got to think about, like, when you see 3PO walk, it's very robotic.
All right, that's a good
He
point.
was moving way too fluid, and and
you're not wrong.
So I just thought that I just honestly thought that he was just like some guy like in a suit that used almost like a Batman type thing, like he was using it to strike fear in people, and
Well, it was David Prowse.
Well, yeah, I mean,
he actually is a guy in a suit. No, I know what you're talking about. But like a Batman kind of thing. Yep.
Yeah, like a Batman
Iron Man or something.
Right. So I'm thinking like, okay, he's just, this this bad guy. I mean, and the cool thing I love was the juxtaposition of where you see these stormtroopers in all white, and then you see this guy coming towering and on this dressed in all black. You know, it's kind of had this whole thing where it's like, yeah, I'm definitely the leader of everybody. And you know, of course, he's walking around. And when he starts talking, I'm kind of like, okay, maybe he sounds that way because of the mask. And I always thought we were gonna see him take his mask off at some point, but he doesn't.
Yeah, that's true. I thought the same thing. And it's like that, just the way he had his speaking too, you know, I mean, it was so funny. Like the one line where it's like, you know, the one dude's like, holding her is dangerous and all this. And I'm thinking like, okay, man, what are you? You're like talking to this. Clearly there's a difference between what this guy's about when you're about it. And this is when we just see him walking through the hallway. Like, we don't know that he has the force or any of that. We just see, like, okay, there's you're 7 feet tall, you're in this armor, and then you get this other dude who basically looked like a 1970s British guy that's walking through, kind of scolding him, you know, holding her is dangerous. You can, and by the way, this is also after he just choked out the dude.
I was all about to say, like, the first scene when you see those feet dangling and then you see it's Vader holding him with one hand, he crushes the guy's throat and then he throws him against the wall.
Yep.
At that point, I was sold. Yep. I was like, okay.
Kind of like, all right.
This guy's the baddest man on the planet.
Exactly. In the very next scene, the guy's walking up. Well, holding her is dangerous. If the Imperial, and I'm like, of course, I just love the way that James Earl Jones delivers, leave that to me. It's almost very sing-songy and un-Vader-like in some ways. You know, there was, it's kind of, what was the one that you, I remember what it was. The one thing you always picked on, because you, like me, were much happier with the Vader voice performance in Empire Strikes Back. That's when Vader became more Vader. It's like
this sounded like he was talking through a transistor radio.
Yeah, transistor radio or something, and then even just the vocalizations, you know, Commander, tear this ship apart before. It's like it's like
weird,
really weird. Yeah. So I mean,
Vader's voice. I mean, I hate to sound like this because it sounds like this whole, you know.
No, I know, I get
it.
I
have a bromance with him or something. But
I'm right there with you though.
But like in Empire, you know, it's warm, it's velvet base, you know, it's clean velvet. It's like a nicely EQ'd subwoofer.
Mm-hmm.
Where, you know, A New Hope's Vader sounds like, you know, you blew a speaker and it's barely hanging on. You know, that's kind of what it sounds like to me. But nonetheless, you know, Darth Vader, of course, you know, I thought that was his actual. I mean, it is his actual name, but I didn't know that was like one Darth. It's a title.
Yeah, well, nobody did.
Name.
I mean,
you know what I'm saying?
And again, sure, because I went back. You know, again, I go back to the 6-7-year-old me, 1977, 78, depending on when my parents. I don't remember what order. I remember C-3PO was the first one I got. I don't know, maybe Skywalker. I know Vader was in the early figure collecting, though, right? He was probably like. I want to say maybe the third action figure I got or something like that. I know R2-D2 was in there, but the point is that it said Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith. And again, you're still trying to figure out, is Darth his name? Is it his title? Because as we talk about a lot, it was even further convoluted when Ben Kenobi further said, you know, only a master of evil, Darth. It's kind of like he basically called him by that name. Now, of course, the Obi-Wan series does change that a little bit. It tries to give context to that. It's not just a retcon. It's not just a, hey, we're going to fix this. It actually tries to go deeper than that. It gives context to it. It tries to say that he's further separating himself from the human Anakin, his friend. And it's like, okay, you want to be this Darth Vader? I will refer to you. It's almost like if your friend became president and you started acting less and less like your friend, you know, or sometimes you get this too in work relationships where, say you have somebody who's above you, you know, like your friend, John Jones or something, right? And John Jones is, like some higher up guy, but he's been your friend for decades or whatever. Well, if he starts to act a little bit too formal with you and all this stuff and basically just throwing your friendship away or something like that, you might be like, okay, well, fine, Mr. Jones, I'll do that. It's almost that kind of thing. It's almost like, okay, you want to be this Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith guy? Fine, Darth. It's
right.
That's the vibe that I get. Now, of course, you don't get that when you first see this movie, though.
Right. Yeah.
Especially if you're first seeing it back then. I mean, you have to have the weight of this whole franchise behind you to give it that kind of nuanced context.
Well, yeah, I mean, just like, I always use the term, like going to based on your examples. It's like when that friend or gets a doctorate's degree. It's kind of like how Dr. Evil's like, I didn't spend, 8 years in medical school to be called Mr. I thank you, that type of thing. So it's kind of like I never knew that Darth was a title versus Vader's his actual Sith name. But that character alone, his imposing presence, he definitely came on the screen, filled up the room. He showcased his power. We knew he was incredibly strong to lift somebody up, and then of course be strong enough to crush the larynx and then launch him into a wall. I mean, that was super impressive. And then of course later on we see him at the board meeting, and then that was one of our other moments where we get to see an example of the Force being used in a not so positive manner when he Force chokes Admiral Mahdi. So that was just like, okay, this guy is the man. He's like the baddest man on the planet. Like, okay, clearly he and Obi-Wan have to come to blows because Luke is too whiny to even deal with him. I don't even know if Han can deal with this guy. It's like Obi-Wan is the only person I've seen use the Force,
Right. He's the established right Jedi. Yeah. And he was basically saying, look, Vader was once a pupil of mine before he turned to evil. So they were setting up the whole Obi-Wan versus Vader fight where, because I remember it was really funny, because there's actually a couple points I want to make before I get into that, to go back to that whole Mahdi thing. So when he choked out the guy in the beginning, this is a counselorship, where's your ambassador thing. There's long been, and I think Lucas cleared this up too during one of his commentaries, and I don't remember what it was. There was long-standing been a thing to where, did he just crush his windpipe with his mechanical hand and throw him, or was he actually using the Force? But no matter
with a mechanical hand,
I think so. But the Mahdi scene, that was when you're like, oh, okay, this is different. And of course,
not to be super medical and technical, but how you could tell the difference is because in his hand, he's actually crushing bone because you hear it.
Well, he could do that with the Force too, though.
But we've never, like, anytime you hear people getting choked with the Force, you never hear it cracking. It's the muscles that he's constricting around your throat that causes the asphyxiation.
I don't know if that's and that's the thing. That could be, because I do think I remember there was a reference that he was actually crushing with the mechanical hand. That would make perfect sense, especially given that was the same hand that threw him. I mean, he could be using the Force then too, but I mean, again, but that none of that even matters. Look, y'all can debate that in the comments section. The point is, with the Mahdi scene, he's definitely using the Force. He's definitely powerful. He's actually kind of funny. I mean, he's not above one-liners either. And then, of course, now you see Tarkin's power, because Tarkin's all like, Vader release him, and he's like, as you wish. And again, you're like, okay, who is this guy? Why can he tell Vader what to do? Why does Vader listen to him? Yes, I know he's a commander of the military, but why does Vader care? Right? It's like, I mean, when you really stop and think about it, and we even have comic book references, I mean, I remember the Emperor started yelling at Vader because he's like, dude, you got to stop killing people. I can't replace them faster than you kill them. It was one of the funniest comic scenes I have ever read in Star Wars.
Well, well, the thing is that if you just keep it on the premise of, the movie,
which is, I guess we're supposed to be doing that, but
well, we knew nothing about the Emperor at this point.
That's true.
So
that's true.
At that point, all we knew was Vader and Tarkin. So to that point, Tarkin could have been the leader of the Empire, and Vader
but why?
Had to listen to him.
But why? You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like when you really look at A New Hope, you're like, okay, clearly, look, I get Tarkin's kind of a shrewd, maybe somewhat intimidating guy. He's not intimidating this guy. And clearly Vader has no problems choking out other officers.
Well, yeah. But I mean, and it's kind of like the same way you got Han and Chewie, though. It's like Han, I mean, quite frankly, Chewie could knock the crap out of Han and choke and rip his arms off. But he listened. I mean, granted, we eventually hear the backstory of
the
their
life-death
thing.
Well, and that's something, honestly.
But prior to that, we don't know why.
Well, yeah, upon
pretty much
seeing the
listens
movie.
to Han.
Well, that's true, but a lot of that too is my kind of a friendship thing, and of course, you could sort of see that with Vader and Tarkin because that's later established that Vader respects Tarkin. Of course, we don't knew that then. And then the whole life debt thing, it's kind of funny because that was one of the things that Lucas was talking about in his interviews back in the late 70s before. Like, the two things that we knew, and I'll just go over this quickly. The two things that we knew after A New Hope, like in between A New Hope and Empire, definitely by Return of the Jedi, because Lucas would do a lot of interviews about this. And one of the two things that we knew were that basically Vader was disfigured because Obi-Wan and Vader fought, and they were kind of in a somewhat weird mountainous terrain or something. Obi-Wan always had the high ground at that point. Vader then fell into some lava. Now, of course, Lucas eventually modified that a little bit and expanded that and just made the whole planet a lava planet, but the beginnings were there. And the other thing was that basically Han saved Chewie from the Empire or whatever when he was going to be executed. And that was when you had that whole Wiki Life Debt thing, which I also think is where the holiday special came up with that Life Day thing, too. It was kind of like a tie-in, sort of. Mm-hmm. So you did have a little bit of that going in. I mean, you're right. If you just look at the movie purely without any outside influence, no interviews, no nothing, then yes, there's a lot of different things that you would question and say, well, I don't really understand this. It doesn't make sense. But then the point I'm trying to make is even back then we had some context. It wasn't like, we needed all the prequels and then Lucas did do a lot of interviews back then to give some things context, especially, right. He kind of had to because this thing became such a cultural phenomenon that everybody, I don't really think he wanted to, but he was being badgered and asked all the time.
Yeah, sure. With a character like Vader, it's, who knew that he would be such, an icon of pop culture. But, it started in this movie, that whole line, I find your lack of faith disturbing, as this guy's basically berating Vader about, because let's just, I don't think we've talked about this, but the whole plot of this movie is the reason why even the ship is chasing the Tantum 4 in the beginning is because if you've ever seen the movie Rogue One, if you have not, definitely check that out. But the rebels acquired the plans, the blueprints to the Death Star. And in that, they analyzed that there was a weakness that was built into the reactor core of the Death Star, the thing that powers the Death Star, right? And so the rebels will figure like, okay, we can find the blueprints. We can maybe analyze a way to destroy this thing because that's the Emperor's big weapon. That's how he's used to control all these planets and systems, because you have this moon-sized space station that pretty much has the ability to blow up entire planet. So
yeah, let me just stop there because that was one of the things that, of course my dad would pick on all these, well, this is unrealistic. I'm like, in context of what? The whole thing, like in context of a Wookiee? I mean,
the Force, all of it.
It's a fantasy film.
True,
the whole thing is unrealistic, right?
Right.
But one of the things that really bothered him was how the Death Star had the propulsion system, basically.
Okay.
I get it, right? Because it is a little wonky. I mean, it's they did.
We do find out it can travel through hyperspace.
Sure, which makes it even weirder. And
Why?
not to mention the fact, well, a couple of things. When you have something that's the size of a moon, that mass, flying at that speed, I mean, there's been a lot of like scientific breakdowns of how basically just by that thing flying, it would just devastate entire systems. I mean, but I forgot how they actually explained the propulsion of it in universe, because as you know, I used to collect. They used to do the those different like encyclopedia type things.
Oh, books, yeah.
One of them was weapons and technology, and the Death Star was in that, and they talked about things like that. So kudos to them for eventually coming up with something very detailed to answer a lot of these fan, shall we say, concerns. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where when you really think about it, in universe, you can understand from their perspective how daunting it would be to try to destroy something of that size and magnitude with the little ships and weaponry they actually had.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's the ultimate David and Goliath thing, right?
Right, exactly. And that's once again another story trope that they use, and so you have this whole space station that's used to control all these different planets, and the rebels feel like, okay, we can control this thing or blow it up. It takes away all their power, and it takes a good number of the Empire out with them because, like I said, it's a size of a small moon, which can hold a considerable amount of people. So, the reason why they were even having this meeting was because Vader was trying to retrieve those plans from that particular ship where he finds Princess Leia on. And of course, Leia, she hides the plans in R2-D2 and kind of sends them out in an escape pod. And the Empire sees the escape pod, but they just figure like, oh, it was a malfunction from the fight that they had on there, and there weren't any life forms that they could scan, so they didn't think anything of it because
man, there was like some I don't remember if it was Robot Chicken. It was somebody that did the most amazing spoof of that, where they're like, oh, don't worry, there's no life forms aboard, and the dude's like, what are you talking about? I mean, it could be, and it just went from there, and it was so funny. I'm pretty sure it was a Robot Chicken thing. But
yeah, they're notorious for doing stuff like that.
But I mean, the thing is the points that the guy was bringing up were spot on.
Absolutely.
But
yeah, I mean,
continue.
Yeah, this whole thing is it's hinged upon them finding these plans, and the rebels were trying to get them to their base so they could figure out a way to blow this thing up. So this board meeting was basically, to figure out like, okay, what's the next move, because they didn't find the plans on the ship. And Admiral Mahdi was trying to admonish Vader about it, and Vader kind of utters, one of my favorite lines, don't be so proud of this technological terror you have constructed. The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force. And that just sent Mahdi into a whole frenzy, because he's like, okay, man, you're trying to hold on to this religion that no one cares about, no one even has even heard about for like years now. Don't come to me with that. Like, we want results. And then, I don't even believe that stupid crap even exists, honestly. And then Vader had to prove it to him by force choking him. Like, bet you believe me now, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what Tarkin is basically. Is like, all right, this bickering is pointless. It's not getting us anywhere. Vader let him go. You made your point. Okay, let's get back down to business. And Vader's like, all right, as you wish, and let him go, and just kind of casually just walks off. like ultimate boss move, right? So,
well, and you got to think in terms too that all those guys probably now were thinking a little bit twice, because you got to wonder how often did Vader actually show off his Force abilities? Probably not a whole lot, because remember, and of course, again, this is full disclosure. This is stuff that we find out a lot later on through other canonical sources, but Vader basically was looked down upon by a lot of the Empire military, I guess the Imperial officers, put it like that. People didn't understand what he was doing there. They knew that he was basically like the Emperor's pet, as they said, but they're basically, again, they didn't know it was Anakin Skywalker. They had no idea who this guy even was. He came out of nowhere. And so they really didn't respect him much, and actually they were kind of disrespectful to him, sort of like a "what are you doing here" kind of thing. It wasn't until later on, and I'm trying to remember the name of the officer. He was actually present during, it wasn't Mahdi, he was present during the boardroom scene, and Vader eventually killed him before The Empire Strikes Back, and that was when he took over as the military commander in The Empire Strikes Back. That's when he was the guy in charge. And of course we saw his I want to say ruling style, but pretty much
his might, it was at the forefront now. Yeah.
His leadership style. That's what I was trying to say. So
Admiral
exactly.
Piet, and you had,
well, he came along in that was Empire.
Empire, yeah. But
and poor Admiral Ozzel.
Yeah, Ozzel. But yeah, so Vader, kind of just became that guy, and you saw that, not only is he this powerful guy, he has a Force, but he's also a great pilot as well, because we see him at the very end, the last third of the movie, he's piloting his own TIE fighter, and he's picking off these rebel pilots, man, like left and right down this trench. He's like, okay, I want to get into battle. I'm not about to sit here and just try to, because they kind of figured out what they were trying to do. And they were just like, okay, well, Vader's like, all right, well, I'm gonna go deal with it. And, one of the guys, kind of went up to Tarkin, was like, we might want to do something, and Tarkin being so, being like, in our, these little guys at our moment of triumph, I think you underestimate their chances. Like,
But it was so funny though, when he was kind of like, hey, we analyzed their whole thing, and there is a weakness, so we got a shuttle over here for you.
Yeah, exactly. And so, we also see Vader's skill as, a pilot, as a swordsman, as he combats Obi-Wan Kenobi. So, Vader is the ultimate package, man. This guy is powerful physically. He's imposing. He's very threatening, even with his own. Well, he didn't know it was his daughter at the time, but when he was interrogating her, and now we would discuss the location of your hidden rebel base. It's just like, okay, he's very menacing. And then on top of that, he could do everything. He can fight with a lightsaber. He can fly ships. He's a great pilot. So,
yeah, I mean, you knew it was cool when he had his own version of a TIE fighter, and that was to this day. Exactly. My friend and neighbor Jeff, I had like, and really it was so stupid. This is so petty, but it was like, my parents were generous enough that they bought me just a ton of Star Wars. Now, it wasn't like the commercials, because in the commercials, when the kids are playing, they've got like 30 stormtroopers and all that. Realistically, we had one of each. I had a stormtrooper, a snowtrooper, a biker scout. You had to make it work with that. But I had a lot of the vehicles of ships. I had the Falcon, I had the Death Star, I had the, all these play sets. I mean, Hoth, Tatooine, you name it. He had some stuff, but the thing that he had that I wanted that I never got was Vader's TIE Fighter. Now, keep in mind, I had the regular TIE Fighter, I had the X-Wing, but he had two things that I'm like, One of them was Vader's TIE Fighter. The other one was a snow speeder. I never got those. Yeah. And I've never forgotten it. And I'm 52 years old. It still bothers me to this day.
Maybe Santa will get you one for next year.
I don't know, might cost a little bit more than the $50 it cost back then. Although I don't know. I mean, if it's, you figure today's money, it's probably like $300. So who knows? But yeah, but again, you did think that when you saw that, okay, Vader kind of had his own thing going. He had his own TIE fighter. You can, again, they were dropping clues, right, into what this guy really was that were going to pay off later. But I thought that Lucas did a really good job, and his team, of course, establishing a lot of these different things. Some of them very obvious and out there, other ones a little bit subtle, and you had to think back. And this is at a time where the movies were coming out every 3 years.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he definitely set the landscape for science fantasy films. I can't even say science fiction, but just playing in that sandbox of being in space. I'll just say that. He really did, completely revolutionize it, from the storytelling to the technology to everything, building these great characters as we explained today. And there's so much more we could actually talk about, honestly.
Oh,
but
yeah.
we're already almost at the 2-hour mark. So
yeah, I mean, we could easily do a New Hope Part 2 if we wanted to. But I mean, some of this stuff, though, we did cover in our last episode, The Legacy. So if you guys missed that, go back and watch it. We actually have our What is Star Wars playlist happening, so you guys can, check that out. And yeah. So I mean, any final thoughts on this whole New Hope thing that we're breakdown or analysis or whatever that we're covering tonight? That you haven't said?
I would just say that for those of you who have not seen it, hopefully this kind of gives you some context, especially if you're new to Star Wars. Hopefully this kind of gives you context of what's going on, and why, we, Eric and I, love Star Wars. And of course, the mass populace love Star Wars so much. And I hope you guys got something out of it. I hope we brought out some things that you might not have known, or maybe you did know, but, you're glad that we brought up. So that's pretty much it for me.
Yeah, well, if you guys, I will say that I have a New Hope, that if you guys haven't seen Star Wars A New Hope, you'll go back and watch it. It's been around for a while, so unless you're 6 years old now. But look, there's still some of those guys out there, they wear it like a badge. Like, I've never seen a single Star Wars film. Like, that's something to be proud of.
All right.
It's like, okay, calm down.
I'm just playing.
Right? But, whatever. But here's the thing. In the comments section, let us know some of your favorite scenes, when you actually first saw A New Hope. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we can get into in the comments section. I mean, just because we're wrapping up this show live doesn't mean that we can't continue the discussion in the comments section. Also, join our Facebook group, Head to Head, a Star Wars Community, because we can talk about this stuff there. So, and of course, we also have our Twitter and Instagram at Head to Head SW you guys can check out. And of course, if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button if you haven't done so already, because again, that helps the algorithm and it lets us know that you like our content. And if you guys, maybe you're watching some of our videos and you're going, wow, I wish these guys would just talk about this or whatever. Drop a comment in the comments section and let us know specifically what you guys want us to talk about, or write in our community tab. We'll entertain any topic idea. But again, we're going to be talking about the Empire. Shouldn't come as any shock to anybody that follows the order of this thing. Next Monday, we're going to talk about The Empire Strikes Back. I have a feeling that could be a 3-hour show.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends, because I think that we've laid the groundwork between The Legacy and A New Hope, which was the movie, of course, that started the whole craze. I think we've covered a lot of that, laying the groundwork and all that stuff. So we can really get into some things for The Empire Strikes Back. So you guys are not going to want to miss that. And then, of course, you're not going to want to miss this Friday, not even going to tell you what the topic is. Just going to have to watch. Actually,
you should know already.
Yeah, you should know because it's already posted on YouTube. So hit the notification bell so you're reminded. We'll see you guys Friday night, 8 o'clock. As always, with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the force be with you, always.